Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, or your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it.
Today's story is called From Duty to Heartbreak. It is another soldier story. We have told stories of soldiers here before, but not a whole lot. So this is actually our second story. I'm excited to share it with you guys. This is the story of Derek Tolliver. On November 20th, 2000, in Converse, Texas, which is a suburb right outside of San Antonio, Pearlie was watching TV, doing what we all do. You know how it is when you finally are done with work, you put the kids to bed, and you get to watch TV. It's one of my favorite pastimes. So Pearlie was sitting down around 8 p.m. watching TV when her doorbell rang. And it wasn't the normal doorbell, where there's a pregnant pause after it rings completely. Well, it was somebody who was ringing her bell constantly. So she rushed to the door, unaware of what would be outside. But she found Lorraine Allen. It was the girlfriend of her next door neighbor, Derek Tolliver. And exhausted and out of breath, Lorraine spewed out the words that her boyfriend had been shot. And so she's trying to process this information, and she knows that the next thing to do is to call 911. So both her and Lorraine call 911 and report that there were shots at Derek's home. Now, in the meantime, in between time, Lorraine is giving Pearlie the rundown. She tells her that she's been trying to call Derek ever since she arrived at her doorstep, and Derek wasn't picking up the phone. The police arrive promptly in the suburban neighborhood and instruct them to stay inside the house, both Lorraine and Pearlie. And I've talked about this here, but I'll revisit it very quickly, that when police arrive on scene and there's an active shooter, they're trying to shift everybody who could be a possible victim to somewhere safe, and they have their guns drawn because they don't know if the perpetrator is on scene or not. They enter the garage because that was the point of entry. It was still open, and they find Derek unresponsive, lying on the floor of his home. He had 2 gunshot wounds to his head. Both were fatal. They search his home and they do a sweep where they go around with their guns drawn, and they don't see a possible perpetrator on scene. So they leave and they tell Lorraine of his death. She was obviously upset. She was distressed. They go back inside of the house, and a crime scene unit is there on scene to collect all of the evidence. They find that the house was ransacked. It was clearly a home invasion. At least that's their first assumption. Drawers were pulled out, and they also find a missing .380 casing on the ground. There were signs of forced entry by the patio door. They found a knife, which they believe was used to kind of jimmy the patio door so they could open it. And they believe that it was the point of entry and the point in which the perpetrator left as well. So as they're looking around, they see that Derek's wallet was missing. And by missing, I mean it wasn't on his person. But the person or perpetrator didn't take it far. They actually found it on the property. However, when they looked inside of the wallet, they found his credit cards, all of his money. So once again, was this a robbery gone wrong? I mean, we don't know, but it's looking like not so far. They also discovered that part of his blinds in the front of his home looked like someone was peering through the window. And you know how it is when your blinds or shutters kind of get stuck. And so they knew that either this person was lying in wait, looking to see when Derek was going to arrive home, or was there a second intruder like that was playing lookout, giving him the directions on where to go, him or her? So they didn't really know. But they knew they needed to talk to Lorraine because Lorraine had information. Lorraine was the last person to be seen with Derek. So they arrived back at Pearlie's house, and this is when Lorraine drops a bomb. It was a very special night for her. It was actually her birthday. Can you imagine the depth of pain that comes from that night, but then future birthdays after? I just cannot even imagine that. And my heart goes out to her. But Derek was a romantic, or at least a romantic by my point of view, because Derek had planned a birthday dinner for her. And instead of doing what typical people do, right? Like, let's go to this restaurant. He said, no, baby, I'm going to cook for you. Okay. And that's romantic to me. So they went to the grocery store together, and they returned back from the grocery store and are putting things away. Well, Derek was the first person to get out of the car and left Lorraine behind just to, pick up the rest of the groceries so she could bring them in. But when he enters the home, Lorraine hears a popping noise. And it's not just a regular popping noise. No, she knew these were gunshots. So she ran. She ran to Pearlie's home. But she also heard more popping noises. And I'm saying popping noises. I guess I should stop. They were gunshot noises. She heard them repeatedly after she left to go to Pearlie's house. Now, she didn't know much about the perpetrator. She knew that it was a man and he was wearing a hood. He was thin. Not a whole lot of information, right? But this suggested to police that the home invasion was out, right? It was out. It wasn't a home invasion gone wrong. And this really was because if indeed it was a home invasion, when she first heard the shots, when Derek entered, well, obviously they were surprised. And so you're shooting not necessarily to kill, but shooting to scare, right? But when she leaves and she's headed toward Pearlie's house, she still hears gunshots. It implies that it was a targeted attack. They were shooting to kill Derek.
Police and investigators, they're trying to figure out who is this Derek Tolliver, right? We need to know who he is so we can maybe understand why this targeted attack happened. Well, Derek Tolliver enlisted in the Air Force at the tender age of 18. He was driven by a strong desire to serve others and make a difference in the world. I kind of relate to this desire that Derek Tolliver had to just serve other people and make a difference in the world that he lived. Now, he was known for his social and likable nature. He was the type of individual that quickly won the hearts of those that came in contact with him. And in 1982, while he was stationed in San Diego, he crossed paths with Teresa, and their connection blossomed into a loving relationship. Derek was deeply enamored with Teresa, and he eagerly embraced the role of father to Teresa's young daughter, whose name was Iris. And he just kind of came into that role, and he cared for her since she was 2 years old. He just stepped into those shoes, and he took that responsibility on well. Now, together, they expanded their family with 2 sons, Anthony and Eli. And Derek's sister often praised Derek's devoted fathership.
In 1996, as their children entered their teenage years, the family relocated to Texas seeking a stable environment, and Converse was the perfect place to do so because it was located near a military base. So it was close to his job as well. They adapted well to their new life and they finally settled down in that community in 1997. However, Derek's time away on deployment took a toll on Iris in particular. She faced serious legal troubles, ultimately leading her to imprisonment for a grave incident that resulted in the loss of a life. Now, this ordeal profoundly impacted the family and significantly impacted Derek because he could not put his mind around the fact that this happened while he was away, and this was a daughter that he loved and deeply cared about. And I think as a parent, you always think about what you could have done better inside of that situation to do more for your child. You always want to do more. And what I noticed here is that ultimately Derek and Teresa's relationship suffered as a result of Iris going to prison. And this often happens when you see children who die young or at any age. Sometimes that takes a toll on the marriage, and you often don't see people who are married sticking together. And this is what happened with Derek and Teresa. They decided to separate, and Derek remained the primary caregiver of their 2 sons, and Teresa moved to an apartment in northern San Antonio. They were striving to stay active in their children's lives and have a healthy co-parenting relationship. In 1999, Derek's journey took a new turn when he met Lorraine Allen. He was approached by her, and a budding romance grew between both of them. Derek was still in the military at the time, but they met on base. Now, she was not affiliated with the military, but she worked there independently. And they shared a bond. And you may be saying, well, what is that? They both were going through separations, hoping to eventually get divorced. And actually, Lorraine was further in the process than Derek. At least at the time that they met, she was hoping to officially divorce her husband by the year's end. Now, Derek and Lorraine nurtured their relationship. They really enjoyed companionship, and they were really focusing on building their lives together.
Lorraine was a potential suspect, and they needed to thoroughly vet her and verify her background and the information that she provided. Obviously, they can't just rule her out. You always know, you're true crime fans. You know they got to make sure they look to the person closest to the victim. So they inquired about her relationship with Derek. Now, she stated that they had no issue and she would never harm him. And they believed that she was not involved ultimately in this murder. Pearlie mentioned that they had a normal relationship, and she saw them, going out in the evenings, going out to the store. Nothing seemed unusual. Like, their relationship seemed normal and loving, like any relationship that you would expect. And when questioned about whether anyone sought to harm Derek, she suggested maybe Lorraine's husband. She said that Teresa and Derek seemed well. And she even noted that Teresa came over to pick the boys up for the night. And she was supposed to pick the boys up at school, but they were picking up clothes instead. So that particular night was unusual, right? Like, she was not even supposed to be at the house. She was just supposed to pick them up from school, but they forgot their clothes. So she had to go pick their clothes up, pick them up from the house and pick up their clothes. Now, Teresa and the boys were accompanied by two males when she came to pick up these clothes. And one was her boyfriend and the other one was unidentified. Now, the first gunshot to Derek was from a distance. But the second shot was in close proximity, and they know that because it was directly to Derek's head. Now, police needed to have a conversation with Teresa and identify who was this individual, or really even both the individuals. They knew that one was her boyfriend, but like, who are these guys that came with you to this house? And so they wanted to question, her and why they came to pick these clothes up. Like, what was going on that created this unusual situation that caused her to show up with these two men. One of the men that Teresa identified was her boyfriend, Emmanuel Fonzie. And she identified the other guy as his friend, Jeremy Farr. Detectives bring her boyfriend, Emmanuel, in for questioning. Now, he was younger than her, significantly so. He was 19 years old and he was from Arkansas. He had moved to Texas and he met Teresa shortly after that. And it was around the time that she had separated from her husband. He was working as a door-to-door salesman. So he had moved into the same apartment that she was in, and they hit it off and they started dating. So investigators shift their focus to the day of the incident. They shift their questioning to, okay, so tell us what happened on this particular day. And he claimed that he was only present to get his girlfriend's kids' clothes. Like, I'm just there helping it, her get her clothes, is what he told the police. He stated that the boys accessed the garage, retrieved their clothes, and then they left. As simple as that. It was in and out, boom, boom, bang. They left at around 4, and he said that they played basketball and then they went to bowl at around 8 p.m. So after talking to Emmanuel, they contact Jeremy, the friend. And Jeremy is also 19 years old. And he was in Texas looking for a job. And he had confirmed that exactly what Emmanuel and Teresa had already said. So at this point, the investigators asked Teresa, we need to interview your sons. can you bring your sons in? And they have to ask for parental consent because the sons are only 11 and 13 years old at the time. Now, Teresa allows them to be questioned, and they knew at the time that their father had been murdered. They were absolutely distraught, as you can only imagine. Like, Derek was their sole care. I mean, he was their primary caregiver. And so they were completely distraught, and they were having a difficult time talking to the police, but they were able to answer questions, and they confirmed the stories that Teresa, that Emmanuel, and that Jeremy had already said. However, an incident between Lorraine's husband and Derek seemed to provide a motive for murder. So the police kind of shift and say, okay, we've questioned Teresa and these two 19-year-old boys. That seems to line up. So let's take a closer look at Lorraine's husband, who was David Allen. And they began to look into that as maybe the potential suspect in this murder.
The reason why police knew about Lorraine's husband was from first Pearlie, who mentioned an incident that happened, but also the boys, when questioned, mentioned the same incident that Pearlie had mentioned earlier. So they knew they needed to look at David Allen. And there was a incident that occurred at Derek's home where David came over and confronted Derek and said, hey, you need to stop messing around with my wife. And they kind of pushed each other, but nothing happened other than that. And when they interviewed David, he claimed that after that confrontation, he kind of knew that his marriage was over and that relationship had ended. Like, that was the final nail in the coffin. And he decided to move on and start his own relationship. And actually, on the night of the murder, he was with a companion, a friend, right? A new lady. And so the police check out his alibi. It checks out. And they were really left with no new leads. And this lasted for the entire year. Now, eventually, this case would be classified as cold. And you might be saying to yourself, how does we hear cold case all the time? How is a case classified as a cold case? What that simply means that detectives have exhausted all of their leads and there's no active leads coming through. And so they have to put it in the category of cold case. Doesn't mean that they're not working on it. It just means that all leads have been exhausted and no new information is coming in. So 3 years passed without any new developments until January of 2004, when the cold case detectives received a breakthrough from Will Reynolds. Now, who is Will? Well, Will is a constable officer in Helena, Arkansas. And Reynolds reported that Chris Sanders, while at a party, confessed to him that Emmanuel and Jeremy were involved in a murder. He stated that Emmanuel and Jeremy provided him with the information about the crime and its commission. And Will kind of suspected, like, maybe Chris is just drunk, because drunk people talk, but drunk people also tell the truth sometimes too, right? So he's a part of law enforcement. He's a constable officer. And so he kind of does his own investigation. And he finds out that Emmanuel was living in San Antonio. And during that time, a murder did occur. So he knew he needed to reach back out to the Texas detectives. He said, I got to tell them this information, which I commend him. He did an excellent job. So police interview Chris Sanders first, because right now it's just all he say, she say. But really, what does Chris say? So Chris tells them, they say, Chris, what do you know? He says that actually Emmanuel didn't tell him anything. It was really Jeremy that informed him about the murder. And he didn't implicate Emmanuel. He didn't say that Emmanuel did the murder. However, he did say Emmanuel was there. The police know, okay, this is good. We got good information, but it's just still he say, she say, right? They need to speak to the source. Well, Will, our boy Will, was willing to go to war. He said, I'll go undercover and I'll wear a wire. Because Will is living out his true crime fantasies over here, okay?
Listen, right, Will was like, I have been waiting my entire life for this scenario, and I signed me up immediately.
Yes. And what was so interesting is that Will actually did, like, the connection was Will actually did have a relationship with Jeremy. They built trust. Will was the perfect person, if we're just being honest. Will does suit up and puts on a date to talk to Jeremy. He asks Jeremy, hey, did you commit murder? I'm hearing that you was involved in something. And so naturally, Jeremy is like, what are you talking about? No, absolutely not. And then he does a tactic that a true investigator would do. He tells him, he's like, man, listen, you know, I'm a part of law enforcement. I actually saw a statement that Emmanuel wrote saying that you committed the murder. He put it all off on you. Now Jeremy is on defense. He needs to defend himself. He's like, wait. I mean, well, if you know already, then I'm going to just tell you what really happened. So he claims that it was all for Teresa. Teresa was the mastermind. She was tired of being broke and she needed Derek gone. She wanted to kill him for his life insurance policy money. Jeremy states that he was the one who had the gun. He was the one who pulled the trigger, but he was promised $50,000 for his role. They were only able, after hearing all of this, they were only able to charge Jeremy. They could not charge Emmanuel or Teresa at this time because basically Jeremy just confessed to his role, right? He did implicate both Teresa and Emmanuel, but it wasn't enough to connect them and arrest them. So they finally do charge Jeremy shortly after with murder, and they want to lean in on him. After they charge him, they say, hey, come talk to us. And it's so funny because my husband, we were watching a true crime documentary, and he was like, why do detectives talk to the alleged perpetrator if they know the truth? If they already know they're connected to the crime, why do they talk to them? I think that's a good question because they like to get people hook, line, and sinker. Like, just confess. This is another piece of evidence that we can present to the jury so we can get a conviction, right? So Jeremy was like, nah, y'all got it. If you know it, then you know it. That's it, right? So he's like, I'm not going to talk. So he says, I'm going to trial. In 2005, they have enough compelling evidence that he is convicted of murder, but now he's facing sentencing and he's facing life. So they knew that Teresa was the mastermind and that Emmanuel had a role in the murder. So they decide they're going to go back to Jeremy and put an offer on the table. And they say, hey, we're willing to take life off the sentencing. What we recommend, we're willing to take that off of the table if you tell us about Teresa and Emmanuel's role. And Jeremy decides he wants to talk, right? Like, finally, save yourself, Jeremy. So Jeremy says to them, well, actually, it was Emmanuel who approached me. I was living in Helena, Arkansas, minding my own black business. And Emmanuel called me and asked me, was I interested in doing a job? Now, by no means do I want to paint a picture like Jeremy was an innocent party. Jeremy was known for his violent crimes. So they buy him a bus ticket, send him up to Texas, and Teresa then lays out the full murder plot. And there was a life insurance policy on the table for $600,000.
Teresa was anxious about the murder because the divorce was about to be finalized, and part of the conditions of this divorce was that you couldn't change anything until after the divorce was going to be finalized. And so, you know, he had already had this $600,000 policy that was established, and she was a beneficiary of this $600,000 policy. And so if he was going to change that, it had to be after the divorce was final, not before. And so she knew she had to if she was going to do something, she had to get it done before this divorce was final. So the quicker, the better for Teresa. And Emmanuel gave Jeremy the gun. Teresa used her children to get over there, right? Like that was her whole ploy, to use her children to get over there to be able to scope the place out. Now, when they got inside, she pointed out that there was this broken fence, and this was the entrance and exit that they used after leaving when Teresa went to go dropped the kids off to get their clothes. They gained access through a side entrance that Teresa had opened previously, and, not through like jimmying the back patio door. Emmanuel staged the burglary and positioned themselves for an ambush, and they basically lied in wait, just waiting for Derek to come through that door. Emmanuel had a knife, and then Jeremy had this gun. Now, Derek walked in the house, and Jeremy shot him with that 380 caliber pistol. Derek falls to the ground, and he puts the gun to his head to ensure that he was dead, and he fires the second shot. So remember, we told you that first gunshot was from a long distance. It wasn't close, but that second one was up close and personal. And he fires and shoots him in the head. And Emmanuel takes his wallet, and then they flee out of that broken fence along the way, and they ditch the gun, drop the knife and the wallet. A few days later, after being questioned by police, Jeremy catches a bus back to Arkansas. Now, he did receive some payments, emphasis on some, because he did not get all. He received some payments of $100 here and there, but he never received the full amount. But Teresa, sis spent all that money within months. And she traveled to Orlando, Florida with her children and Emmanuel.
So they were able to secure warrants for Emmanuel and Teresa. And by January of 2008, Emmanuel Fonzie went to trial for the murder of Derek. And because Jeremy was the star witness, he was convicted and sentenced to life. Now, Teresa wasn't present at the time of the murder, which could be tricky for the defense. They charged her with 2 charges: a single count of conspiracy, and then a count to commit murder across state lines, which is why it was a federal offense at that time. So the defense argued that Emmanuel and Jeremy Farr acted alone, that she had nothing to do with it. She didn't tell them to do anything. They just did it all on their own. So basically, she just circumvented herself and threw the blame on them. In October of 2009, she was found guilty of murder. And once again, in large part, that was due to Jeremy's testimony. As I already said, Emmanuel received a life sentence. She received a life sentence as well, but Jeremy received 30 years. Now, Derek's adult boys had obviously went through a lot, losing their sister early in their childhood, then losing their father tragically, and then they lost their mother. And so when we say that sometimes it's more than one victim, it's usually always that way. Like, because of that ripple effect we talked about in last week's case. And it just affects everybody. But they managed to keep going. They were resilient. And both of them actually honored their father by going into the service, because Derek had served over 20 years in the military. I don't have a takeaway for this case. I think this is one of those cases where this is tried and true, like, greed. And greed corrupts. It corrupts. And we've talked about the love of money. And I think that this case is just incredibly sad, because sometimes you cannot prepare for the unexpected. If y'all got the secret, let me know. But you just cannot prepare for somebody who you once trusted, who you have children with, to then come along and kill you because they don't want to go work. And she blew through that money. And when they found her and Emmanuel, they were living destitute. They were poor, had no means of living. And this is just one of that evil corrupts completely. That's the name of the game when it comes to this story. And my deepest condolences go out to Derek's family. And one thing that his sister said was, this forever changed our family. We don't even get together for Thanksgiving, holidays. It shifted the trajectory of our family completely. And I think that we cannot be lost on the fact that these murders are real and they change people's lives in reality. This is not just a story we're telling you. This really affects others and affects them forever. MD, you have any thoughts?
I think you encapsulated all of that well, Steph. And um, my heart goes out to Derek's boys. You know, they had the biggest loss of all.
Tell us what you think about this case. If you are kind of unaware of how you can tell us what you think, because we're always looking to know what you think. We want to hear from you. You can do that via DM if you're just not one of the comment girlies or guys. You don't want to leave a comment, but we have an Instagram post which we put up pictures every week of every case that we do on our Instagram and Facebook page. You can leave us a comment there. You can actually leave us a comment on Spotify, because Spotify has an option where you can just leave us your thoughts. We can reply, we can heart, we can tell you how much we appreciate y'all. And then also, you can also just email us and say, hey, like, I really love this case, or these were my thoughts. We always want to hear from you guys, or you can, do it on the solo tip and send it in the DMs. And we will see you guys next week. Until next time, this is Murder in the Black.